Good morning again, everyone, and
Good
welcome
morning.
to Thursday morning Bible study. We're glad that Dee was able to join us here and all of you be able to join us. We were working on the story of the raising of Lazarus. I was not here, I guess it was last week, because I was teaching a workshop for new pastors at the seminary. So let's see. Is the screen showing?
No.
Yes, I see it.
I see it.
I can see it.
Good.
Yes.
All right. So
Let me. I have to go out and come back in because I don't see. You can continue without me. I'm
Okay.
just going to leave and come back in.
Okay. Dee, you said you got through most of the story, but you had some questions. So do you want to?
Well, yeah, I got my notes here. It says we completed verses 17 through 44, but got hung up on the resurrection on the last day in verse 24, and what Jesus said in verses 25 and 26. In verse 27, we made a connection between John saying last week they began to believe and Martha saying she come to believe. We also compared both sisters' response to Jesus' delay. We also connected verse 40 and verse 4, speaking on the glory of God. I gave them homework to reread the entire chapter on Lazarus and come back with anything else they wanted clarified. I also ended the session by saying season 1 left us in suspense because verse 44 doesn't tell us what happened after Jesus said, Lazarus, come out. That's it.
Doesn't verse 44 says the dead man came out.
Yeah. That's all he says. Lazarus came. Wait a minute. He does. I went to sleep on that one. Okay.
All right. Well, why don't we?
I'm hearing a lot of noise in the background.
Yeah, there's some kind of feedback coming from Dee's. But so when she's not talking, she's going to put herself on mute. But when she's talking, we're probably going to get a little bit of static in the background.
Okay.
So why don't we kind of go through in case people did have more questions. So why don't we just take it from verse 17 to 27? Why don't we reread that and see if there were some questions in there that I'll address. Actually, they really go to the heart of one of the sort of the dynamics of the scene. Who would like to read verses 17 to 27?
I'll read.
Okay.
When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, only about 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise. Martha said to him, I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I have come to believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world.
Okay. All right. So in addition to the questions that Dee said you had around the resurrection, any other questions in that passage that came to mind to you? All right, well then I'll just point out a few things. It's really it's important that he says that Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. Why do you think that's important?
Doesn't the body decay after 3 days?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Start
the
decaying?
idea that yeah, there's no doubt that Lazarus is dead.
Mhm.
Remember, Jesus had raised a couple people. Remember the little girl that they
Yes,
thought had died, and he says, well, she's just sleeping. And do you remember the widow's son? You know, they were already in the funeral procession. And then he raises him from the dead. So in the case of the little girl, we're really not sure that she actually died, because Jesus says she's just sleeping, and we don't know if she really was just sleeping, or and they mistook her for dead, or whether he was using the term sleeping as a euphemism for, death.
mhm.
So there would be questions about whether that really was a raising from the dead. And with the widow's son, why might they question whether he had really died? Maybe he was just sleeping, even though they were in a funeral procession. Do you remember how how long, if how soon after death the Jews would bury?
Oh, sundown, like right away,
Within 24 hours.
right, the
Yeah.
next day.
So it's possible that maybe he was asleep, and Jesus just wakes him up in a sense.
But
Uh,
maybe he was just in a coma,
yeah, just
but
just some kind of thing that he didn't really die. So those were challenges that were being made to those stories. So in this case, John points out that Lazarus has been in that tomb for 4 days. He's dead. Okay, there shouldn't be any question about that. So we'll get to the difference between the two sisters, because we hear that, Martha hears that Jesus is coming and she runs out to meet him. But when he says, your brother will rise, and Martha says, I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. What's going on in that exchange?
I felt she didn't think that he was going to raise him up now. She was expecting to see him, in the afterlife after we all die.
Yeah, I
And
mean, the
Yeah, and
initial
was it like 2 different levels? You know how John always does the earthly and the heavenly thing? What they were thinking on 2 different levels?
it could be that as well.
could it be?
But
But
she just had no expectation about what was going to happen. She was thinking that he's dead and he will rise. But Jesus is saying in the present, and she's talking about the future, I think.
Yeah,
exactly.
and I was gonna comment on that too, that it was just hope for eternal life.
Right.
She had some hope.
Yeah, so Martha is expressing what was the traditional view of the resurrection for those who believed in the resurrection. Remember, not all Jews believed in a resurrection from the dead. Remember, we had that at a couple of weeks ago when the Sadducees come to Jesus, and St. Luke tells us the Sadducees, those who did not believe in a resurrection, and then they pose to him the question of the woman who married 7 brothers.
Yeah,
Okay, so not all Jews believed in the resurrection, but for those who did believe in the resurrection, the belief was that it was going to occur on the last day. Okay, it wasn't going to happen until God was ready to sort of, in essence, end the world. And we still believe that as Christians. We believe in the resurrection on the last day, right? We even say that in the creed. So we agree with Martha that the resurrection will occur on the last day. So when Jesus says your brother will rise, it's just like if I said to, after somebody had died and I said your loved one will rise, you would normally say, well, I know, but that's not going to happen until the last day, right?
Yeah.
So her reaction is very normal, and it's in accord with what we understand the resurrection to be. But then you're right, Jesus shifts it from he will rise to I am the resurrection and the life. So Jesus is saying in the present tense, I am the resurrection. You don't have to wait until the last day to know the resurrection of the dead. And what she, and then he asks her, does she believe it? And then, as Dee pointed out, you did rightly see that whole John theme. I have come to believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. So the idea that faith is a progression, and that it typically not everyone believes fully from the very beginning. They believe in stages. So is Martha completely there when she says that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and the one who is coming into the world? That's good. I mean, she's not calling him a prophet anymore, right? She's not even calling him a miracle worker. She's actually calling him the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. But in John's perspective, is she fully there? It's a trick question. It's a tough question. What does John believe?
No.
What would you need to
No,
believe
I would
about
say
Jesus?
no.
I think
What-
she's
I
not.
would say no.
What do you
I-
think you need to believe about Jesus to be fully there for St. John?
that that Mary that Martha understands that who she's talking to is God incarnate.
Is exactly right. So the fullness of belief for St. John is that you believe that Jesus is God.
Yeah.
So even though she's saying, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world, all of that is true. And it's a deeper faith than I believe that you're a prophet, right? It's still not the fullness of belief. So Martha is still on that journey of faith, but she's getting closer. Okay. Well, let's put on hold for a minute what it means for Jesus to be the resurrection. I am the resurrection, because it's a little curious as to why is he saying I am the resurrection. So let's move on to the next paragraph, and that'll bring some other questions to you. So Michael, why don't you read from verse 28 to 37?
Okay. When Jesus had said this, she went
Oh, wait.
and called her.
When she had said it, when Martha had said it.
When Martha had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying, the teacher is here and is asking for you. As soon the picture's in the way.
What your
Scroll-
Zoom picture?
Yeah, scroll down a little bit.
You can move that.
Can I read my, okay,
Yeah, well, you can read. You have your version in front. Yeah.
okay. I'll start over. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary secretly, saying, the teacher is here and is asking for you. As soon as she heard this, she rose quickly and went to him. For Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still where Martha had met him. So when the Jews who were with her in the house comforting her saw Mary get up quickly and go out, they followed her, presuming that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled, and said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Sir, come and see." And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have done something so that this man would not have died?"
Okay. All right, so now we hear about Mary's response. So what was your question about the different ways between the way Mary responded and the way Martha responded? What did you see as the difference between the way Mary responded and Martha responded?
Well, Mary expected Jesus to have saved Lazarus before his death. And Martha.
So when she says to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died," is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, is that different from what Martha said?
Probably not, because she was grieving. But
Yes, so Martha says the exact same thing, right?
right,
Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.
right, because she was grieving too.
But then Martha goes on to say, "But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you," right? Does
Right.
Mary say that?
No.
No. I mean, I have a theory as to what the difference between I agree with you, they do react differently. Do you see any difference, or would you speculate as to the difference of how these two sisters are responding to this event?
Hmm.
I'm just seeing this for the first time, but it seems to me Martha is expecting Jesus to do something like right away. I forget how she says it, but you're the Son of God and God will give you whatever you want. So she's expecting him to do something then, I believe. But Mary doesn't really ask him in the same way. She's she's mourning, she's weeping, and she hasn't made that request of Jesus. I know that God will give you whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Because Martha says, just like Esther says, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even still, even now, I know you will, whatever you ask of God, God will give you." So Martha really still believes that Jesus could do something about the situation, right? Whereas Mary says the same thing, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And then she just starts crying, right? So I would say, just like Esther, is Mary thinks it's over, right? Mary doesn't seem to have any expectation that Jesus is going to do anything. It's too late. If he was going to do something, it would have had to be done before the brother died.
Right.
Father, and maybe it's in the progression of faith that it happens, but I find there are distinct differences. Martha is the one who complained that her sister wasn't helping her. I've got all this work to do, blah, 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 blah. Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus, when they were entertaining other people. And that I find it striking that Martha was the one doing the work away from these conversations, but she's the one who believes that, whatever Jesus asked for, God will give him, like right then. Mary had been sitting at Jesus' feet all that time, but somehow still didn't get it.
Okay. Well, let's play with that.
I can relate that to the way we sometimes react to things, but I just kind of find it surprising because I would think that Mary heard more of the conversations that Jesus had with, others and his disciples and all, but
Well,
still
let's
didn't
play with
get it.
that. I think that's a great thing. Now, first of all, we have to say, remember the story of Martha and Mary and serving and sitting at his feet. That's in the Gospel of Luke. Okay, so it's not clear that John even knows that story, right?
Okay.
Because he doesn't include it. Although I would say, to me, the sisters are acting perfectly consistently in the two stories. So even if I think John may have known the story, but he just didn't feel it was important enough to tell us it. And maybe because Luke had already told us the story, he didn't feel he needed to tell it again. But I do believe that the sisters in both stories are acting consistently, which is what lets me believe that the two stories are probably, true. They really happen because they're consistent. How would you see it? Does anybody see the way Martha and Mary acting here consistent with the story of, the visit Jesus pays and Martha's running around?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Martha is on her feet. She comes and she runs to Jesus, and that's consistent of her not, taking action. Whereas there's Mary again at the feet of Jesus. That is consistent. So she
And she's
she
sitting.
kneels down at the feet and starts to weeping. So that is a little bit consistent on what Luke is saying.
Yeah, I mean, so exactly. You read it carefully. So the both sisters get word that Jesus is there, right?
Right.
And Martha immediately gets up and goes to see him. She's an actor, right? She's a doer. She don't sit around and let the grass grow under her feet, right? He's here, she's got something to say, she gets up and says it, right? Now look at the difference between what happened. Martha runs to Jesus and says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, right? Now look at how Mary does. Mary gets up later and goes there, and she falls at his feet and says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. What do you think? What's the emotion? How do you think Martha is expressing her emotion? And what emotions do you think she's expressing to Jesus? And why does Mary's difference of falling at his feet kind of give you that it's a different emotion going on?
Well, for me, I think Martha goes at him a little angry that he wasn't there. She is just, she's confronting him with a little bit of anger. And then he comes back to her and, sort of like, why are you angry? And, don't you believe in me? And he goes through all that. Whereas Mary falls at his feet and gives up. It's like, whatever, you've been here, he would not have died. And she just goes into her weepy self.
Yeah, I would agree with you. When I preach on this story, some of you have been to my funerals where this may be the one that they chose. They usually just pick this part, not the Mary part. But yeah, I agree. I think Martha's angry. And she's a doer, and she expected Jesus to be there and to do something about it. And when she finds out that he's there and he hadn't done anything, she goes right to him and confronts him, right? There's absolutely no sense that she falls at his feet in supplication, right? Or as in subordination. I mean, I think she's in his face, and I think she's, wagging her finger or shaking her fist.
Yep.
Saying,
exactly something I would do. Yep.
Almost, excuse my French, but damn it, if you had been here, none of this would have happened.
Yes. And then he challenges her with her faith. He does
right.
that.
But she still expresses, she still thinks Jesus is a doer. He can still do something about it. She doesn't know what.
Right.
But she still thinks he can do something. And when Jesus says your brother will rise, I think Martha's response is like a sigh. Yes, I know he's going to rise, but that's not going to happen until the end of time. Right?
And I want to say something. Esther was, I think, saying that that Martha was the one that was at his feet listening. But I'm gonna say this. I mean, Mary was at his feet, but Martha Just because she was walking around working doesn't mean she was listening. Because, I do work and I listen to, listen to TV, I listen to the radio. Doesn't mean I'm not hearing what's going on because I'm doing something else. Martha could have heard everything that he said, even though she was running around doing all the work. Whereas Mary was sitting there, supposed to be listening. She could be just looking at Jesus in adoration and not hearing a darn thing he was saying. And that can happen too. The person at his feet didn't hear a thing or didn't comprehend what Jesus was saying at that particular time.
Yeah, or didn't fully process it. I think you're going to see
Yeah.
that as I go on and point some other things about the story that we often overlook or misinterpret, in my opinion. That's gonna get backed up. So here, I think, to me, the importance is, again, remember, bring it back to human reality. How many of us, we lose a loved one, we thought that something could have been done to stop it, and it didn't. And why didn't God stop it? Why did God allow it to happen? And then, the priest comes or your friend comes and tries to comfort you that, well, they're at rest, they're with God, we'll see them again. And basically you say, fine, but that doesn't help me now,
Yes.
right? It still hurts now. What about now? Right?
Yeah.
And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. I am here for you now.
Right.
So Martha is like, if anybody have heard my favorite line of the way I use when I preach this, Martha starts with what if, right? What if you had been here on time? And, yeah, well, the resurrection, that's on the last day, but what if, he hadn't died? And Jesus says, no, the question isn't what if, the question is what now? And I am here now. Okay. Now, we're going to still have to figure out, what does he mean by I am the resurrection and the life? We'll come back to that because we have to know the whole story. But
Father Rich.
what's that?
No, I was saying the question becomes for me is, who do I resemble in my Christian walk?
When you're reading
Right.
these stories, are you more Martha or are you more Mary?
Am I more Martha or am I more Mary at times?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know that yeah, and there are other ways of responding to death that aren't Martha and Mary. But
Yeah.
but I think this is one way people respond to death.
Mhm.
Yes.
and
I think
and
I'm
and
sorry.
Jesus doesn't say, I point out with people, and when we're looking at Martha and she's upset and she feels that maybe it didn't have to happen this way, and she's, Jesus doesn't tell her, watch, oh, Martha, don't feel that way. How many times when somebody's angry at God, we say, oh, don't feel that way. That's not really helpful. A person feels the way they feel.
Exactly.
And Jesus, if this is a scene where Martha is angry and shaking her fist at him and saying, where the hell were you, and all that stuff, Jesus does not say to her, don't feel that way.
Right.
But what he says to her is, I'm here for you now. Okay, even if you didn't think I was here for you earlier, I am here for you now. And I am the resurrection and the life, and whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me. And then
So that makes me think that God is the God of the present, not the past or what's happening, what may happen in the future, but he's present in our life today, right at this moment.
I agree with you exactly. So when people, for me, are stuck in the what ifs or the why did it happen and everything, I try to redirect them. I don't say don't ask those questions. I just say that, those questions aren't helpful because we'll never know the answer to those questions. All we know is what happened. And so really the helpful question when someone has died is to say, what now? What do I do now?
Mhm.
And that you can help the person with that question, right? You can help them how to live for today, and even just take it one day at a time, not have to think of what you're going to do in the next year. Just what are you going to do right now?
Yeah.
And you know, eventually you'll be able to look at the broader picture. But even looking at the broader picture isn't helpful right away. You know, so when somebody dies and experiences that, to me, I always try to direct them to the here and now. We don't know what could have happened in the past if things had been different. We don't know why things happened the way they do. And you can ask those questions, but you're not going to make a lot of progress with those questions. But if you ask the question, what now? Then we can start to work on that question, right? We can start to figure out what are we going to do right now. And I think that's what Jesus is doing with Martha. He's not telling her she shouldn't feel the way she does. He's trying to redirect her, though, to the here and now, and that he's there for her now. And I love the line, because whenever I do this at a funeral, I read that line, whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. And watch, if you're ever at my funeral and I'm reading this, what do? I look directly at the family and I say to them, do you believe this? Because if you don't, we don't have much more to do, right? We got to work on some other things. But if you do believe it, we can begin the journey of where we have to go. So Martha does believe, and even though she doesn't fully believe, she does believe. So I think Jesus is fine with Martha right now. But look at what happens with Mary. So Mary is sitting at home, just weeping, right? How's that different from her reaction? And how does that, maybe some of you, can you relate to, losing somebody and just staying home and weeping?
Yeah, I was gonna
Yes.
say Mary was really grieving,
Mm-hmm.
and
And
she
how is that
it
consistent
just
with the personalities that St. Luke tells us in that story about serving and sitting at the feet? How is Mary's response here consistent with that?
Well, Mary kind of seems like she has no hope, where Martha is still saying, that she believes and she's looking forward to the resurrection. But Mary seems like she feels that's the end. That's it. It's done.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, as we go further, you might conclude that, but just from a personality perspective, St. Luke gave us a sense of their personalities, Martha running around doing the hospitality, Mary sitting at his feet quietly listening, right? And now John's telling us this story about how they're reacting to Lazarus's death, and Martha is out there running around shaking her fist and yelling at Jesus, and Martha's just sitting quietly at home. How is that consistent with her personality?
She's looking to Jesus for some kind of, I think she's, like, like Valerie said, for some kind of hope. She's sitting at his feet, hoping that he'd give her something that she can understand. It reminds me of a friend that I have who lost her husband. And it feels like, it still feels like she's given up. It feels like, all hope is lost. And no matter what you say to her or whatever you do for her, it seems like she's not coming alive again. It seems like she has walked to the grave with that person. And this is what Martha seemed like. Mary seems like she's done. To me, her personality telling me that She's a person that, gives up easily, but looks for someone else to fix whatever problem that she has. And she falls at Jesus' feet for that help because she doesn't know what else to do. And to me, it's like she loved her brother so much that she would even go to the grave with him.
Dee, Dee, you just said everything that I was thinking. She was giving up, gave up hope. Like we would say sometimes she's ready to climb into the coffin with her brother. And not to diminish Martha's emotions, but it seems like Mary was so deep into her emotions, she couldn't see anything else. I mean, she was completely cut off from thinking about Jesus, what Jesus could do, what she had heard, she was just deep into her emotions. All she could do was cry and nothing else filtered into that grief.
Especially,
But you said it, Dee, because I was thinking the same thing.
Well,
but
you
especially,
see two different personalities too. Martha seems to be more aggressive, and where Mary seems to have fallen passive, or is of a passive nature. It's two different personalities that you're seeing.
but what about
You-
if he was the sole breadwinner? Suppose he was the breadwinner, like this person I'm telling you about. He was the one that everybody leaned on. And she might be crying too, saying, now, what do we do now? He is, giving all hope because all her hope was put into her brother. And if this brother was the breadwinner, the one they went to for every problem that they had, and now she's so broken because she don't know what they're going to do. She can't see beyond her circumstances because she don't know what they're going to do now because he's gone.
Yeah. But
So that is a what
not a
now
but
situation.
go ahead.
No,
I'm
I'm saying,
sorry,
so
go
they
ahead.
look like that is the what now situation.
Yeah. But I can, from a personal point of view, when my husband passed away and I was all discombobulated and, and then I had nowhere to go. This was before he passed away, of course. He was diagnosed with cancer and I had nowhere to go. And I was just so confused, and I can tell you the name of adjectives that I felt. But in my journey with strengthening my faith in God, I discovered something that I hadn't discovered before. And that honestly was strengthening my personal relationship with Jesus. And now, when I have tribulations in my life and trials, no one or nothing can disturb that. My personal relationship with Jesus is my foundation. And I find that more and more to be my blessing. It is a blessing to me to have discovered that. And once I discovered it, no one can take that away from me. So that's how I feel about Mary. Mary probably discovered something that Martha didn't, and now it can never be taken away from her.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Good. Is there a right way to respond? Is Martha right and Mary wrong, or Mary right and Martha wrong?
No.
No,
There's
No.
not
no.
wrong.
Yeah. And again, I think, that's part of the lesson here, that the two sisters respond differently. And in neither of the case does Jesus say, don't feel that way, right?
Right.
They just respond differently. And yeah, I mean, I would say that, as you point out, Mary is the quieter one. She's the more reflective one. She's the deeper emotional, that type of thing. And maybe that's why she responded the way she responded. And Martha is the doer, the active one, the one that can't sit still. And, that's why she responded that way. But neither of them is a right or wrong way. So one of the things that I'll often point out with families when we're looking at this story is there's no right way or wrong way to feel about the death of somebody, and that people
Yeah.
grieve differently. And just because someone doesn't grieve the way you're grieving doesn't mean they're not grieving. They just are grieving differently. Because that can be one of the very difficult things in families when people grieve differently. One of the things that it happens a lot, and it happened in my own family when my nephew was killed in an accident at 21 years old. And it's not unusual. They say about 50% of marriages break up after the loss of a child. And my sister's marriage broke up after that. And one of the things I'm convinced was that she and her husband grieved very differently. And my sense was that it was hard for them to stay together because you're not grieving the way I am. You must not be grieving, or there's something wrong with you, the way you're grieving.
Or you didn't love that person the way I love that person.
You didn't love the person the way I love the person, or whatever. I can't say for sure that's, what happened between them, but that's usually a huge point of contention between family members when there's a death. One might say to the other, okay, daddy's died, just get over it. Let's move on. Or you're stuck in the past, or you don't care. How could you go ahead and do this without feeling anything about what just happened? That kind of thing. People grieve differently.
Yeah,
and
we
there's
experienced
no right or wrong way of doing it.
we experienced that same type of loss in our family because my sister and her husband lost their son and grandson on the same day. And my sister and her husband had a very hard time dealing with it. And my sister just was, she just could not get over it. She just mourned herself almost into ill health. And my brother-in-law mourned quietly. And they got to go back and forth with each other to the point that they separated. But through healing and through therapy, they're back together. But it's like you say, everybody grieves differently. And we witnessed that, and it was really a toll on the whole family.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you easily can pull that out of this story as well, that I think Martha and Mary react very consistently with the personalities that Luke tells us in the story about Jesus's visit. And they, even in their grieving, a lot of that personality stays with them. That's why I think the two stories are perfectly consistent. And probably, maybe John knew the story of Jesus's visit. But anyway, I just think it's just masterful how John keeps it. I can totally believe it's the same two sisters in this situation. All right, now let's move on a little bit, because now this is where it gets a little tricky and even some controversy in how do you interpret what happens next. So Mary comes out and she falls at his feet, right? So she expresses a little bit different reaction. By falling at his feet, she still sees Jesus as, greater than she. She may see herself as the disciple, which is why she was at his feet, when he was at her home. So she falls at his feet and says the exact same thing. All right. But instead of going on, she cries, right?
Mhm.
And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, "Sir, come and see." And then Jesus wept. What is going on here?
Oh, okay, so Father Rich, this is where I got to my question. Because I told you I wasn't here, but that line that starts, he became perturbed. Okay, where is it? 30. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed. I on my app, it says became perturbed, a startling phrase in Greek. Literally, he snorted in spirit, perhaps in anger at the presence of evil, that is death. But
Yes.
I don't really quite understand that.
And then he turned around and wept himself.
Yeah, well, I think because of the different approaches of the two sisters, maybe because Mary was so emotional, that Jesus, being fully human, was caught up in the same emotion, recognizing the love he had for the sisters and for Lazarus, and he also cried. So he wept also. But I don't understand the perturbed and what that really means in reference to all of this, because this note doesn't make sense to me. He snorted in spirit. I don't know what that means.
We did talk about that last week, about
Yeah.
the definition
Yeah.
of that word perturbed.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of felt like, I remember it meant to us, most of us, annoyed, little confused and annoyed.
Just
Yeah.
disappointed. He was just disappointed.
If you want, let me look at the Greek and see what the Greek says.
Yeah,
Okay.
somebody looked it up in their dictionary or something to find out what perturb actually meant.
Yeah,
But during that period, it could have mean something different than it does today.
Okay, so it says here, right? The Greek actually, you can't read the Greek, but it's this phrase right here that is being translated as perturbed. And are you seeing that on your screen?
Yes.
All right, so when you click on that word enebryusato is a verb, which means to warn sternly, to rebuke harshly, or to be deeply moved.
Deeply
Okay.
moved.
yeah.
And then tol pneumati means in spirit. All right. Pneumati is a spirit, the breath. That's where we get the word pneumonia, right? P-N-E-U-M. So he's either becoming angry or warning in spirit, or he's just being deeply moved in spirit. But it gives the impression that this deep emotion of being moved by the spirit is not a positive one, right? He's not moved in spirit because of his great love, right? He's not showing compassion or mercy. He's clearly upset about something, right? And so we decided as perturbed, and then deeply troubled is how the word that the Greek uses. So Jesus is having negative feelings right now. Okay, he's not having compassionate or merciful feelings. Why might he? What's upsetting him? Why is he perturbed?
I think I was kind of thinking of that in the same way, that he was taking that in a negative way. That, okay, I just had this conversation with Martha, and now here comes Mary with her crowd, it's like, do you know who I am? Do you believe what I can do? And it's like, they don't. And it's like, okay, well, where have you laid them? So now I got to show you who I am once again.
Okay, yeah, that is one of the interpretations, and this gets to be controversial, but I actually agree with Michael myself. But the other, so it's the weeping that's setting him off, right? When he saw her weeping and the Jews weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled. So there's something about their weeping that's upsetting him. Now, the traditional, what most people were saying is Jesus sees them weeping and he's moved with compassion to, to be troubled as well, right? He's troubled by it. And then that's why Jesus weeps when he finally comes to the grave, right? So the traditional interpretation is that Jesus's emotions here are mirroring the emotions of the sisters and the Jews who are sad because Lazarus has died. And isn't that how we often say that? Well, look, even Jesus wept at the death of his friend Lazarus, right?
Yeah.
What's wrong with that interpretation? If you really think about the story, why does that interpretation not sit right? That Jesus is sad that Lazarus died, and that's why he's weeping.
Perturbed to me and deeply troubled. That doesn't to me says any compassion there that he's feeling. He's troubled and
What's he troubled about? What's setting him off?
to me was setting on why crying because this is his family and they're supposed to know who he is, and yet they don't believe, and they're sitting there crying like there's no hope. If they believed in him, they wouldn't be doing this, and it breaks his heart. To me, it just breaks his heart because his family, just like anybody else in a family, when your family don't believe in you, it does trouble you and does hurt you, and that's what I think is happening to Jesus.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
go ahead.
We just feel this. Oh,
I was going to say, I think that Jesus wept because those around him that he loved were weeping. When they mourned, he mourned.
yes.
I think the scripture tells us to mourn when others are mourning. People around us, we're supposed to mourn with them. So that's why I think Jesus' love for them and for Lazarus, that's why he wept.
So
Because it's just a natural instinct
how
for
do you
human
and-
beings. Don't you start crying when somebody else is crying.
yeah,
You know,
no,
you
no,
get welled up and teared up because you love them and you care for them.
No,
That's what I see.
but how would
I
you
think
then-
Jesus had a physical. I think Jesus had a concern for those who are weeping for physical death. I think physical death was a concern to him.
Wow.
Okay,
Okay.
so even if you go with Gretchen and that the concern about his family and friends weeping, then you're interpreting perturbed and deeply troubled as he's kind of
Sympathetic.
empathizing with them, right? And he's feeling the emotions that they're feeling.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what to make of the perturbed and deeply troubled.
Yeah.
And here's how, because we're getting close to 12:30, I want to move it on here. So to me, Jesus is not weeping because Lazarus died. Okay, he is not having an emotional response to Lazarus's death. And why is that? Well, Jesus knows he's going to raise him from the dead, right?
Right.
So Jesus knows that Lazarus is just asleep,
right,
and he knows what he's going to do.
right.
So it wouldn't make any sense to say that Jesus is dying, Jesus is weeping because of his love for his friend Lazarus.
Right.
Okay. So, which is the traditional interpretation given.
Oh, okay.
But maybe
Um,
because they don't see the glory of God that's standing right before them.
Yeah, I think the emotions that Jesus is having has something to do with the response of everybody around him.
Right.
And they clearly, as several of you have said, they clearly don't think Jesus can do anything about this.
Right, exactly.
And he's angry, he's upset, and he's sad.
And he's disappointed.
Yeah, and he's disappointed that they don't get it. So he's perturbed, he's deeply troubled, and he weeps. And let's play it out a little bit more so that you can see how, in my opinion, that's the consistent. Again, he sees, where were we? When he sees her weeping, and he sees the Jews weeping, he becomes perturbed and deeply troubled. He begins to weep at the tomb because of that. And the Jews say, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have done something so that this man could not have died? They still don't get it, right? They don't believe that. So they even see Jesus weeping and they misinterpret why he's weeping. He's not weeping because he loved Lazarus. He's weeping because they think he couldn't have done, he can't do anything about it. So after they say that, he's perturbed again, right? So now he's perturbed at what they're saying. First, he's perturbed because they're weeping, and now he's perturbed because they can't figure out why he's crying. Okay, and then what happens? Jesus says, take away the stone. And then Martha, who said, even now, I believe God will do whatever you ask. Martha objects and says, there will be a stench. He's been dead for 4 days. And then what I think, the way Jesus answers in 40, Jesus is angry. Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Right? It's not a sweet little question. Didn't I tell you? No, he's angry. Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And if you're upset and you're crying and you believe there's a stench because he's been dead for 4 days, you do not yet believe.
One thing I wanted to mention that you mentioned earlier about the other people that supposedly that we question that he raised. To me, if he had raised them and people saw it, then why is this different? And that now they'll see the glory of God. Would they have seen it already in the people that he raised before?
Well, that's why I told you what those two stories are. It's possible in those two stories to say those two people weren't really dead.
Right.
So I don't really believe that he raised them from the dead.
Even the man who was in the funeral.
Yeah, because it's only within 24 hours.
Right.
So he could have, as you said before, he could have gone into a coma or something and he could have appeared dead, but maybe he wasn't.
That's why I wanted to make this clear, because even at the beginning, when he was talking to the disciples about, he was telling the disciples earlier that, that they was going to see the glory of God, and that Lazarus was sleeping, not dead, and they didn't understand that. He's never said that before. So he is thinking that this is something that should change their mindset, which he's never said in any of the other cases.
Well, it'll change their mindset after what he does.
Yes,
but they still don't believe he can do anything about the situation. So let's just move a little bit farther so we can get to the end of it. And so they took away the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd here, I have said this, that they may believe that you sent me. So to me, again, this is more evidence that Jesus knows what he's going to do. And he knows that, God is going to act through him. And he's just kind of going through these motions because they don't believe, right? Jesus believes, they don't believe. And that's why he's upset. And so then when after he had prayed this, he cries out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. So Jesus said to them, untie him and let him go. Okay. So the emotions, I think, that are going on in this story are all because people don't yet fully believe. And so they're crying, they're weeping, they're angry, they're dismayed because they don't fully believe what God can do for them.
Yeah.
And Jesus is perturbed and disturbed and troubled and crying because they don't believe it. Right? Are you with me?
I know what happened. I misinterpreted when I said that we don't know what happened after that. It ended with us not knowing what the people's reaction was after that. He just said untie them and let him go, but we don't know what, because it goes on to the next session of the Sanhedrin. We don't know how the people felt once they saw it.
Okay, right, and that we'll find that out in verse 45.
Right.
Many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what he had done began to believe in him.
Right.
So, but what I want to point out right here before we end is there a very, very, very important point that a lot of folks don't get. John tells us very clearly that when Lazarus comes out, he is tied hand and foot with burial bands, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. Okay. Does anybody remember the story of how John tells about Jesus's resurrection? When Jesus is raised and Mary Magdalene runs to the disciples and says, they've taken the Lord's body and we don't know where he is, right? And Peter and the beloved disciple run to the grave. They peer in, and what do they see in the grave?
Don't they see that his things have been folded and placed on the stone?
They see the burial cloths.
Burial cloth.
They're one place, and they see the cloth that would have wrapped his face
Right.
in another place.
Right.
Okay. So what can you conclude about what happened to Lazarus and what happened to Jesus that makes that different?
That Jesus resurrected on his own.
Did Lazarus resurrect?
No.
Okay, what did Lazarus do?
Is that a
Lazarus
take on?
forgave-
Lazarus
Go ahead.
sleep and he just woke up.
Right.
Lazarus just comes back to life,
Yeah.
right? But
Right.
he's still in the same human body,
Yes. the
Right.
same-
so he's still bound by the same burial cloths, right? What does that tell us about Jesus's resurrection? What's it tell us about Jesus's body after his resurrection?
Jesus had a new body. He didn't look exactly the same, and he didn't have the burial cloth still on him.
Right. So what happened to Jesus is that he now has a transformed, glorified body, which is different than an ordinary human body. And so his burial cloths cannot bind him any longer. And that's why they're just left there. Okay, because Jesus has been raised from the dead. Now, this becomes a technical term in theology. What we will say, what happened to Lazarus, you might want to write this down, is a resuscitation.
What?
It's a resuscitation. What does it mean to
Okay.
resuscitate somebody?
To bring him back to life?
Yeah, but is it a resurrection?
It's putting breath back
No,
into them.
it's
Yeah,
putting
it's
breath
putting-
back into the same body.
Yeah, so that they can just continue to live in that same body,
Right.
right?
Like what the EMTs would do for a person whose heart stopped.
They resuscitate you. So even though your heart stops and you can be legally declared dead, they pump, they push air into you and they pump your heart and everything, and they bring you, in essence, back to life, right? But they do not resurrect you, right? You're still the same human person, and you're continuing to live in your human life, right? But what happened to Jesus is not a resuscitation. Okay? Jesus isn't just brought back to life in his own human body. He is brought back to life in a transformed, glorified body. Okay? And that's why we say what happened to Jesus was a resurrection, not a resuscitation. So why is that important? Why is it important to know the difference between a resuscitation and a resurrection?
We need to know that there's a change in resurrection that happens, where there isn't a change in you when you're just resuscitated.
Okay, good. I like the way you've used the word "in you."
Yeah.
Why is it important?
I'm sorry, I can't, can you repeat that, please?
Okay, there's a change in when you're resurrection, there's a change in the person. There's a change that happened to Jesus that manifested that did not happen to Lazarus. That Lazarus came out to be the same person. When you're resuscitated, you are no different than you were before. You come into consciousness. You might lose memory for a moment, but you're the same person when you come back around.
So are you saying Lazarus was resuscitated? I missed that.
Yes. I'm
Yes.
saying that Lazarus was resuscitated. When he was resuscitated, he came back to be his same person. He was the same himself. He ate the same. He did everything the same. Jesus resurrected. He did nothing the same. We know he walked the walls. He appeared in a different body. Sometimes he was unrecognizable, that they had to look again to know that it was him. Whereas, that is the difference between the
So
resurrection.
why does that matter to us?
Well, I think we need to know what happened to Jesus. It's not the same.
Why should we know what happened to Jesus? What difference does that make to us?
Because it conforms our faith.
Well, all right, I want to push it further, because that's what's going to happen to us on the last day.
Mm.
That's
Okay?
where you want me to go. Okay, I got you.
So it's really important to realize that when we are resurrected on the last day, we're not just going to stand up in our human bodies and start walking around. Okay? That's not a resurrection. That's a resuscitation. The promise to us is that on the last day, God will raise us in a transformed, glorified body, just like the transformed, glorified body that Jesus has. Okay. So when we talk about the resurrection on the last day, we're not talking about just coming back to life, right? Like Lazarus did. We're talking about a complete and total transformation of ourselves so that we actually exist in a different way. Okay. And one of the differences is how we would appear, right? What we would physically be like. The other is, did Lazarus die again?
Eventually.
Yeah, Lazarus eventually dies again. Does Jesus die again?
No.
No. So once you are resurrected, you now will never die again. Okay, so what Jesus performs here is not a resurrection. Okay, it's a resuscitation, but it's this. Remember what John calls what does John call his miracles? He doesn't call them miracles, he calls them
Signs.
signs.
Yeah.
So the sign of bringing Lazarus back to life is a sign of the resurrection. It isn't the resurrection, but it's a sign of the resurrection. And that's why Jesus can say, I am the resurrection, because here and now I can give you a sign of what is to come.
Is this the greatest sign in the Bible?
Well, John would say it's the greatest sign that he tells of. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty impressive to bring somebody back from the dead. We couldn't do it 4 days later, right?
Yeah.
We could do it 4 minutes later, but we can't do it 4 days later.
Oh my goodness, that'd be all over the news.
But anyway, it's late. I want to just to stop the thing. We could continue on, but it's really, I mean, this is just a masterful story of John. And it's masterful because I think it captures really well the way people respond to death, and that they respond differently, and there's no judgment about that. It is what it is. I think it's brilliant because it shows that even though people say they believe, they really don't. You know, they don't fully believe. And I think it's brilliant because it shows Jesus's emotional response when people don't fully believe in who he is and what he can do. You know, that troubles him, that upsets him. He doesn't just feel sad, he feels perturbed and deeply troubled when people don't believe that he can do, you know, he can bring life out of death. And then I think the story is brilliant because this whole idea of contrasting the dead body of Lazarus with the resurrected body of Jesus, I think is absolutely brilliant. That Lazarus is still bound by the burial cloths because he's still a normal human being, whereas Jesus is not bound by that anymore because he's a resurrected human being. And that's what's going to happen to us. That's what we're looking for, is that resurrection on the last day when we are transformed into a glorious body. If you listen to the prayers of a funeral mass, we say that, we who experience a death like his, may we also experience a transformed body like his. So we believe that what happened to Jesus is going to happen to us. But that is going to happen on the last day. We'll live forever, so we don't die, but we don't fully get that resurrection until the last day. Okay, why don't we stop there?
Okay.
And